Present.
Commissioner Kopp,
Here.
Commissioner Ambrose.
Present.
Agenda item number 2, public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda.
Hi, I'm here, this is public comment, right?
Yes.
General public comment. Okay, good. My name is Sonia Traus, and I'm here just to introduce myself because I got a letter of non-eligibility for public financing, and I'm planning to appeal it. So I will be scheduled in a month, but I wanted to introduce myself first. So I'm running for District 6 Supervisor, and the issue is that I didn't file a form saying that I intended to participate in the public financing, although I certainly am planning to participate. And I have professional accountants, and they've never done public financing before. So they've been in touch with ethics back and forth. I brought this. It's just a little printout of the filing activity, and all it just shows. Actually, if you can. All it shows is that there's been several, our accountants, they've never done this before, and they're using a different kind of software. So there've been a number of attempts to submit the qualifying request, and I guess what I'm saying is that it definitely shows that we're intending to participate, and I feel very badly that we overlooked filing, the initial form, but we're hoping that you'll be able to use your discretion to allow me to, I filed it now, to nonetheless participate in this public program because there's no, public harm. The material parts of the application, like I have the requisite number of San Francisco donors, we have the backup documentation showing that they're San Francisco voters, and we have the right amounts of money. So in the overall interests of the program, like helping people run for office, is definitely served by letting me participate. And it's, yes. So please don't let form overcome function. Anyway, thank you so much, and we'll see you again in a month.
Madam Chairwoman.
Yes, Commissioner Kopp.
Well, what's the status of it?
Yes, thank you for the question. As you may know, the City Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code sets various deadlines for the public financing program. This past week, on the deadline for candidates to submit their nominating petitions, was also the deadline for candidates to declare whether they plan to participate in the public financing program for the November election or whether they are declining to participate. We notified candidates for whom we had not received a statement either way to let them know that at this point they are ineligible because that requirement was not met. So we will be following up as our procedures require for appeals that we may receive, and we would bring those forward to the Commission as required for the Commission's consideration.
How many of these seats are open in November? Five?
I don't know how many are open. There were 11 candidates, I believe, who filed to run for supervisorial seats in November. 10 of them, I believe, filed statements. I should check this.
Only 11? How many? There must be 5 seats open. Maybe 6. Here, don't you know, Ms. Traus? How many are open?
Well, District 4, 4, 2, 8, and 6.
How many?
No, 6.
Give me a number, 5 or 6?
5.
5.
All right. So you got 11 candidates for 5 seats, huh? All right, and you've got administrative procedures if somebody says, oh, I didn't do it because of this. We just went through this with a mayoral candidate. Now we go through it again with supervisorial candidates, huh? Okay, thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you.
Oh, you want to speak? Yeah, follow.
Hi, my name's Ben Libby. I work for Sonia's campaign. I figured I could just give like a little more background on exactly.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your name.
Ben Libby.
Okay.
So when we initially started the process of applying for public financing, we had some trouble with the e-filing software, NetFile, because the accountants that we hired use some sort of different software. And because only one person can be authorized to perform filings for the campaign at a time, everything had to go through the accountants. So the whole process was a little bit complicated, and it took a while for it to get set up and work. The other thing is, yeah, as Sonia mentioned, the accountants have never done a public financing application before. And so this is all sort of new ground for them. And yeah, that's about it.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner
I'm gonna
Rennie.
just follow up, Ms. Pelham. That's the first step in qualifying for public financing, right?
Candidates can submit qualifying or certification requests prior to the deadline of nominating petitions and prior to the statutory deadline to submit their statement
Right.
indicating whether they're planning to participate. But that statement is a prerequisite for certification.
But I guess I'm just curious, is there any way that she can cure this?
I think that's a question we'll need to address when we get to the merits of the question and we bring that appeal before you.
So as I understand it, Ms. Charles, have you filed your appeal?
I wrote a letter saying that I'm going to file an appeal, and the deadline to send that letter is Monday, and then the actual appeal will file next week with like a nice brief and a lot of supporting documentation. And we did cure it in the sense that I have now submitted that form.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Charlie Marsteller. I wanted to say that we were all intimately involved in 2000 when we put the public financing law into place, many of us reformers. And it was certainly our intention to have as full public participation in the program as possible. And we were hoping to see the public's response, as it has been pretty good. So I want to thank Ms. Hraw for her attempt to participate. That really speaks well, I think, of her intents. And I do want to say that we do have a workshop or something coming down the pipeline, at which time the commission itself will be walked through the filing process and the mechanisms to see exactly how it works. And we're going to scrub that procedure to see if there's things that we can't do to make it more user-friendly. It has proven to be fairly user-friendly, but this campaign we've had glitches with software that's used by attorneys or political consultants that we're not familiar with, apparently, or at least was not interfacing very well with our system, and we need to get to the heart of that. So, again, I want to thank her for her interests and express the hope that together we can work this out for the betterment of the people, especially the system, particularly in November as we approach another election cycle. And I have also circulated the new Donald Trump coin, not to get too political, but this coin was issued in 2016. I got it out of China. It's a very good reproduction coin of somebody's fantasy, but in any event, I brought it to our departing hero. I'm hoping that he'll show today so that I can present it to him. It dates the year in which he joined the staff, so it's a nice commemorative of his time here with us. Thank you.
Thank you. So now the consent.
Wait a moment. May
Yeah,
I ask where
Commissioner.
that document is?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Cobb?
Is that a document you're referring to?
Coin. It's a trinket from China.
Oh, all right, okay. All right, thank you.
Call for public comment on the consent calendar items. Items 3 and 4. There being no public comment, I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar items 3 and 4. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Rennie. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, there it is. Opposed? The consent calendar items are approved unanimously. Moving on to agenda item number 5, discussion and possible action on proposed stipulation, decision, and order in the matter of Olson Lee, Ethics Commission case number 1617-99.
Thank you, Chair Chu and Commissioners. As you know, we're presenting this today not on the consent calendar per Enforcement Regulation Section 12E because Commissioner Kopp requested that we consider this item separately. The enforcement regulations set forth at Section 12A that the Executive Director engage in settlement negotiations with a respondent at any time to resolve the factual and legal allegations in a complaint. This agenda item before you today, the Executive Director did, in fact, resolve pursuant to her settlement power. And this item resolves, as the regulations require, both the factual and the legal allegations in a matter with respondent Olson Lee, arising from a time when he served as the Director of the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, which we commonly call MOCD. As you know, that stipulation is attached to the agenda item for your consideration. The stipulated order before you would settle this matter in its entirety. And Ethics Commission staff and the respondent both think that this is a fair and appropriate stipulation, both as to the language of the stipulation, which both parties have to agree upon, and also to the penalty amount that this stipulation proposes for you today. So we hope that you will agree with staff and with the respondent and with respondent's counsel that this is a fair and just and appropriate outcome to this matter. I would remind the commissioners that really we're here today to consider the document itself, the four corners of this particular stipulation. And so the options before you are really two. You can accept the stipulation, you can approve it by a vote of 3 commissioners, in which case we'll sign it and the stipulation will become final. Or you can reject the stipulation, a vote of fewer than 3 in its favor. And if you were to reject the stipulation, really what staff would seek from you is simply guidance about what you might imagine a more appropriate settlement might entail. As one reminder, there will be public comment on this item before you vote. And in addition, counsel for Mr. Lee is present with us today, and counsel would like to make some remarks on her client's behalf.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Molly Stump. I'm the Palo Alto City Attorney, and I've been retained by the San Francisco City Attorney to represent Olson Lee in his individual capacity in this matter.
Wait, you're the Palo Alto City Attorney?
I am.
What, and they allow you to have an outside practice?
This is not an outside practice. This is occasional activity that I and other public lawyers will from time to time engage in to do cooperative work on behalf of other entities where there are conflicts or other reasons why the sitting city attorney needs some outside counsel. We benefit from that in my city from time to time, and I occasionally provide those types of services within the capacity that I have as Palo Alto City Attorney.
Do you know if San Francisco taxpayers are paying your fee?
There's no fee involved in this service. I don't believe the question's really relevant to the the matter that's before.
Well, it's relevant to another subject,
There's no charge
which
for my
is the
service.
continuing conflict of interest of the city attorney in trying to represent city employees and represent the Ethics Commission.
I'm serving
All
without
right,
charge.
I'll
to the-
pursue that with the executive director.
So very briefly, Commissioners, Mr. Olson Lee has been provided with public counsel in this case, and that is quite unusual. And the reason for that is that the conduct that's at issue in this matter is entirely conduct that he engaged in his official capacity as an employee of the City and County of San Francisco. And under those very limited circumstances, the decision was made that it was appropriate to provide assistance from the city's lawyers to him in this matter. So very briefly, we are here and have agreed to the stipulated settlement in this matter, but since the Commission did pull this item off the consent calendar and is hearing it, we would like to note that it is our view that the very most appropriate resolution of this matter would be for the Commission to direct the staff to dismiss this matter with no finding of violation and no penalty of any kind. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, there was no incompatible activity here, although there was a provision. There is a provision in the Mayor's Office Statement of Incompatible Activities that speaks to board service in a nonprofit that is seeking a grant or funding. That provision is aimed at private conduct of city officials who may serve on behalf of boards. And when a question arose about whether it reached this type of conduct, which was official assigned duties of Mr. Lee, the Mayor Lee, quickly clarified that that provision of the Statement of Incompatible Activities was not intended to reach this conduct. The second reason that it's appropriate to dismiss this with no penalty is that even if there was some technical violation, under the factors that the Commission needs to consider in terms of assessing a penalty, it's appropriate that there be no penalty here. There was no personal enrichment. This was official work that Olson Lee did, and in fact, it served the interest of his division and the City and County of San Francisco in providing orderly financing to support affordable housing in San Francisco. That said, if the Commission is not inclined to direct that the matter be dismissed, Mr. Lee would like to see it resolved today. He is a private citizen. He has been retired for over a year, and his overriding interest is to put this matter behind him, and he's willing to do so on the terms of the stipulation that are before you. So I'm available to answer the Commission's questions, and thank you.
Commissioners, any questions?
Recommend that the Commission accept the recommendation of the staff in connection with the stipulation and settlement.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
I have a question for the executive director.
Commissioner
What are
Pop?
the factors which result in a $5,000 maximum penalty being reduced to $800?
As with every matter that comes before the Commission as a stipulated agreement, it's obviously a negotiated agreement. We look at the factors about the seriousness in other factors that are identified in the law and make a judgment about what we think is a fair and appropriate resolution for the case as we see it. We did that in this instance, as we have done in our best judgment with other stipulations that have come before the Commission as well.
Are there factors which create different amounts? Are there factors which create $800, $1,000, $2,000, $500?
I think all of those are, again, negotiated with respondents in the interest of balancing an appropriate resolution to a case, given the factors that we see, and given the interest of resolving a matter where it's appropriate through a settlement to avoid having to go to a more expensive and lengthy hearing on the merits. In our judgment, it was something that we felt was an appropriate response, an appropriate level, and something that we understood the respondent to also agree to.
Based on the implicit finding of staff that there's been a legal violation, is there further custom practice, written policies about what the amount of the penalty should be between $0 and $5,000?
For specific circumstances, no. There are fixed penalty violations in some other areas of the laws that we administer, not under these facts.
Okay, thank you.
Call for public comment. So we have a motion by Commissioner Rennie to approve. Oh, I'm sorry, Charlie.
Moving a little slower today. It's Friday. Actually, it's difficult for us, the public, to make a comment on something because we don't know the particulars or the details of the case. Nothing was provided to the public. Is that correct? So
Wait,
in the...
Madam Chairwoman, excuse me.
Sorry.
Yes.
Didn't you get a copy of Exhibit A?
I didn't. Maybe it's not at the table. It's not at the table.
We can get copies to the table if the commission would like to hold this over towards the later part of the meeting. It has been posted on our website since last Monday.
Sorry about that. But I don't know how pressing the matter is. The commission can make the judgment, but all I wanted to let you know was that the public didn't have any details. I'm sorry,
Well,
unless they read the internet.
If I could just clarify, the commission, for the
Yes.
commission's benefit, the public has had copies. We apologize if there were not copies today, but it has been available publicly by all of our usual methods for the past near week.
That's correct. I stand corrected.
you.
Thank you, Madam Director. Is my coin down there? Oh, great.
Any other public comment? So we have a motion from Commissioner Rennie to approve the stipulation, a second by Commissioner Ambrose. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No?
The motion passes with 3 in favor and Commissioner Kopp in opposition. Agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action on proposed policy prioritization plan for fiscal year 2019.
Thank you, Chair Chu. As you heard reference in public comment, one of our members of our policy team, unfortunately, is not here today. Kyle Kundert, as you saw from my executive director's report, his last day with the commission was today. He is heading back to the Badger State to the next chapter of his professional career and personal life. We wish him well. But as he is not here today, I will be presenting this item and walking through with the commission the thrust of the document and the goal of the discussion today regarding the proposed policy prioritization process for the commission. Pat Ford, who is here with me, and we also have a brief just a discussion tool to walk through, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I thought perhaps to start, though, for the just by way of background, as you'll recall, this was an agenda item originally placed on the agenda, I think a month or so ago, which we continued to this meeting. And it's really an opportunity for the commission on a regular basis annually in the past to look at the full range of policy items that have come before it and try to have a sense and provide feedback about the priorities that it wishes to see in the months ahead. By brief way of background, when I joined the Commission 2 years ago, in July of that year, the Commission first created an annual policy plan, and that was really to capture in one place the range of issues that had been on the Commission's radar for its recent history, but also in recognition that the Commission had expressed a very strong desire to take a very proactive role in assessing existing laws, look at the regulations we had, to make sure that on a regular basis we were evaluating whether they were as strong as possible, as workable as possible, and as enforceable as possible. And so there were a number of issues that had come to the Commission from prior years through civil grand jury reports that the Commission itself had identified and that the public had brought forward to make sure that we had a place to look at all those issues and also to weave in a regular analysis of the laws currently on the books. The annual policy plan was developed as a tool to enable the Commission to have that conversation on a regular basis. As you also know, starting 2 years ago, we requested and were successful in creating a dedicated policy team in the Commission's offices to help with this important work. We were able to staff the positions, 2 positions for our policy unit, and we have 2 positions to this day working very hard, as you know, over the last year on a number of issues that have been important to the public and the Commission. As I noted with Kyle Kundertz, moving on to a different chapter, we will be, over the next several months, operating with 1 policy staff person. It's a side note, but an important one as you enter this discussion today in terms of what we might expect to be able to deliver to you over the next several months. I'll talk about the hiring process to fill the positions in my executive director's report, but it's a note that you'll want to consider as we talk about what is ahead of us in terms of our policy work. So I want to just use a quick overview of our policy program, what we mean by that when we talk about policy. And I'll do that by asking if I could call up the first slide, just perhaps for the benefit of Commissioner Ambrose, who's the newest member of our commission, if you all can indulge me. I wanted to highlight, is it up? Yep, thank you. If you're looking at your screens, and it's now on the overhead as well, the SFGov screen, that when we talk about policy work and what the dedicated policy team is intending to do in our office to support the ramped up policy work the Commission's been focused on over the last couple of years, it really is sort of shorthand for an entire policy portfolio. There are a variety of activities and mandates that come with policy work. This will not be unfamiliar to any of you who've been doing policy work in your careers, but it is, I wanted to give you sort of the sense of the overview and the breadth of the policy work that's involved. So, for example, at the top of this portfolio wheel, we have research and analysis that staff routinely engages in to bring to you, to engage the public in looking at issues, assessing issues, identifying what kinds of issues might need to be addressed to make sure our laws are strong and workable. And that's something that's an ongoing item of work, schedules and bandwidth permitting. There's also data evaluation. Clearly, as we step into things like public financing, as we heard from commissioners through the discussions last year on the anti-corruption and accountability ordinance, knowing what data actually is telling us about the state of the world, the state of our laws, that's another piece that this group is focused on. Not singularly, we have help from our other members of our staff, the IT team, for example. But really assessing what we know about the state of the world through real empirical information is helpful and important to shaping policies that are going to be effective down the road. A piece of something that you're very well familiar with from the past years you've seen is the staff work to bring the drafting of legislation and regulations forward. We work very closely with the City Attorney's Office in that process, and as we have interested persons meetings, these are the kinds of things that help bring to you legislation that, from our perspective, is going to really advance the goals of our policy programs and our strong reform laws in the city. After the legislation, of course, is passed this body, Then there is an entire legislative affairs piece, which means working with offices to actually get the legislation through the legislative process, to assess issues and identify where there might be amendments. And so that's an entire piece following the commission's deliberative process that also is something that we engage in with staff from the Board of Supervisors and other offices and other organizations to help move the agenda toward enactment. There's also sort of the internal functions that we don't see as often in this kind of a setting, and that is to provide advice, written advice to those who have questions about how the law might apply to them, particularly when a law is new or there are new emerging issues around laws that we have. The policy team is integral to assessing those issues, developing written advice so that we can provide sound and grounded legal analysis on how to comply with the laws and the new programs that are being enacted. There's also a piece of program support. That is when we are then implementing, for example, a new anti-corruption and accountability ordinance. This is where the policy team is very closely involved with our engagement and compliance staff, with our technology staff to develop the right kinds of tools that reflect what the law is requiring and hopefully doing that in the simplest, clearest way possible. But that is a part that the policy team will always be involved with, a bit behind the scenes and after a new law is enacted. And then also, throughout this entire process, really, throughout this entire wheel, there is activity to do outreach on issues, whether it's engaging in interested persons meeting, developing content for the web, developing communications and materials for those affected by the rules, and ongoing communication. We had a very strong and helpful presence, I think, during this last election cycle, for example, of our policy team being sort of at the ready when we had calls from the press who were very interested in using our data visualization and understanding how campaign finance activity was playing out in the June election. Our two staff members were very involved in helping to just point both members of the media as well as the public to where they could go to get information, and they could make their minds up for themselves about whether it was good, bad, or otherwise, but really walking through how the law works and sort of educating and informing along the way. So this is, again, it really is more of a portfolio. It's not, we don't really have the luxury of sitting in the office and thinking great ideas in an ivory tower. It is really an active and interactive process that goes beyond perhaps often what you see in this setting on a monthly basis. I've also included, I asked the team to help give a sense from this past election, just a snapshot of how their time was used, given the needs that came up during a peak election season. And this is something that, again, may be slightly different when there is not a mayoral election, but I thought it was a helpful data point or several data points just to understand the breadth of the work. So, for example, you can see here that in the circle that we have in the middle, 15% of their time was roughly on legislative affairs, interacting with board offices and so forth. 25, almost 50% really on compliance advice and helping support the public financing program through an analysis of how does the law work, how should the law apply in circumstances that are being posed to us, and 25% of their time over the last 5 or 6 months has really been on this sort of pure policy research and analysis, policy development that we often see in this setting through memoranda that we bring to you. So that's sort of the overview of the portfolio. When we say policy team and policy work, that's kind of the broad picture. If I could just go to the second of the two slides and briefly show how this fits in with the discussion today, you'll see that on this first slide there is a sort of an orange slice that's jumped out that says policy research. When you go to the next page of the slide, there is an excerpt from the memo that you have before you, and I thought it might be useful just to have this slide before you as you're discussing the litany of issues that we have and the process that we're recommending, and I'll get to in just a moment, that we'll be recommending for you today. And this is from the memo. You saw that there were a list of something like 24 different items listed. We are not asking you to prioritize in order 24 items today. What this really depicts is that one slice of orange from the prior slide. When we say policy research, this is sort of the work that goes on in that area. But what we've recommended and what we're recommending to you today in terms of action is to really take a look at and give us your feedback about what the priority is that you would like to see your staff continue to work on as a priority over the next several months. We are proposing that this be a tool that the Commission can revisit on a quarterly basis, so that if the Commission agrees that public financing program review continues to be the number one priority that we should be working on, then that would be the focus for us over the next several months. We also recognize, though, that embedded in that priority, there will always be the need to be relevant and timely when legislative matters are brought to our attention. Board members who might have issues or policies, ordinances that they're recommending. And there is a regular need, a periodic need, to make sure that we're engaging legislatively so that the Commission's views and the laws can be informed by the Commission's administration and enforcement of the laws, as well as what we hear from individuals who have to comply with the laws. All that information is something that we really want to engage with legislative bodies on, to make members on, that we can make sure that the laws are really strong and workable and enforceable in practice. We know that when those issues come up, they will by definition need priority attention from our staff. And so that's something that is it's basically a subset, but one that will happen. We don't control the timing of, but we will be wanting to address as a top priority as we can. There's a second box here that says priority 2, and these are projects that we recognize may be smaller in scope, important to do as we can, and important to tackle as we can. They may be more defined, discrete projects of larger policy issues. They may be a bit smaller in scope, but it recognizes that there needs to be it's helpful to have clarity about what the sort of second-tier priority projects are, because we know that we have a lot to juggle, but there will be times where we can and should be juggling more than the top priority if we can. Now, again, this is all premised on we are losing essentially one half of our policy team over the next several months. But I think the idea is that we would really like to have the Commission provide its feedback today on this process of discussion once a quarter as a tool to give us your feedback. Are you, what is your reaction to, again, continuing on with the public financing program as the number one priority for us for the next several months, recognizing that we will also want to have some attention to other issues as bandwidth and time permits, to anything that might be sort of a secondary priority for you at this point. We've identified those on the chart or on the table that's attached to the memo. If I can just direct you briefly, it's Agenda Item 6, Attachment 1. And as you see, it goes on for a number of pages, listing topics as we went through to try to assess them, relative order of relative scope of the impact and the relative urgency or sense of timeliness that was important to address the issues. We went through this and tried to give it some sort of a sense, a weight of where these issues would be as we see it. This is not a scientific method, but it's our best judgment about what we understand the impact and necessity of these reviews to be. We also identified some project timelines that we would be, the goal of our timelines, the goal of our work would follow. That, of course, is subject to resource constraints. But we wanted to go through and highlight the number of projects that are on the list. Again, we are not asking, nor do we think it's wise for the Commission to try and identify the rank order of all of these items. In essence, for this foreseeable future, certainly, anything below that first line on page 8 is something that we are likely not to be able to spend resources on because we simply don't have those resources at this point. So we really want to make sure that we're focused in a way that delivers on what the Commission as a body and the public wants us to be focused on over the course of the next few months. And we think this reflects our understanding of that priority order. I would also say, in terms of timing and use of this tool, the idea that I think that we would offer to you today is that we are, the idea of having a policy plan adjusted every month is really difficult for the public to plug in and know what to plan. We expect to come to you every month in our monthly staff reports to give updates on what is happening with each of these priority projects that we're undertaking. But I think we don't want to be asking the Commission to have to adjust every month what the priorities are. I think that is probably intuitive. But we recognize there may be issues that come up either that we haven't planned, that the commissioners have an interest in, and that this also needs to be responsive to enable the commission to have a discussion about where you all see those issues fitting into the priority order that we've established. And so, for example, if the first quarter, the first meeting, the commission has a discussion and says we want to move ahead with public financing, let's stay with it, and the second issue we agree should be regulation review of our city's campaign finance laws, then those would be the two that we would proceed with. If an issue were to come up the next month, then we would suggest the commission come back to having a conversation about this tool and the priority order at the subsequent month. So in the normal course of a commission, in the commission meeting, commissioners will offer issues for future agendas. If it's a policy issue, we can place that in this discussion framework for the subsequent meeting for the commission to decide where it wants to place that issue, all things being equal. I think I'll pause there. I think you might have a lot of maybe questions. We're happy to, Pat and I, happy to answer them. I think our ask today really, again, is simply probably two things. One is to, if the commission, can give us your feedback as a body. Are you comfortable with the priorities that we have set here that we're planning to proceed according to? And adopting this as sort of a quarterly framework to assess on a regular basis as a body if there are any changes to that as you see it.
Thank you, Director Pelham. I think this is a very valuable and a timely tool since we now have a full complement of commissioners, and Commissioner Ambrose is joining us now at the beginning of the end of this fiscal year, but as we proceed into the new fiscal year. And I think that it is always a good exercise and practice to identify areas of priority and the work that we want to undertake in the coming year, and to build a plan around doing that, and obviously identify the resources needed. And there's no shortage of great things to do, but time and resources, unfortunately, are finite, and I think they're becoming even more finite with the departure of Mr. Kundert. So I am in support of the prioritization tool that you have identified here, and I think that the use of the impact and urgency timeliness factors, are helpful to be able to quantify in an estimation kind of way, which matters would rise to the top and should be of primary focus, and would invite my fellow commissioners to weigh in as well. But I would, in the risk of being precipitate, would move to adopt the top three priorities, although I would probably, I would like to get into a little bit the CFRO regulations to better understand what specifically the focus would be. I'd like to understand if it's an overall, overhaul of CFRO regulations, or they would be implementing regulations for ACAO, which I think would be, two different types of work. And that the online political communications, would be something I think is a hot topic and an emerging area that we should definitely continue to follow, but would like to see that included in the top three. So would like to invite my fellow commissioners for other questions and their input. And the last thing, and Director Pelham, on your slide, the first page, you had the pie chart of 25, 25, 25, 10, and 15, and that is a current snapshot. I want to make sure I understand that this is a current snapshot of how the policy team time has been spent over the last 5 or 6 months, say the calendar year 2018. Whether now or later on in the day, I would like to know what, in your view, would be the ideal breakdown of how your time is spent. So this is how time is actually spent, but with current resources of 2 FTEs, and or what would it take to get to the ideal breakdown if that percentage split would be different?
I think I can provide maybe some thought on that at this point. This as you can see, was in the period, as you said, the last 5 or 6 months, in which we were leading up to an unexpected, unprecedented, unexpected election in the mayor's race, but also a campaign cycle. I think this is probably fair during any campaign cycle, although I would say that as we go forward, I think the public financing program support in terms of the engagement of the policy team might reduce a little bit. I think some of what we're doing still internally is getting our, making sure that we're looking at the issues and being as, helping to inform and put in a foundational way, information about how these programs work for the benefit of all of the office and for the benefit of those who participate in the program. I think once we've done that, some of that initial look or initial work will be mitigated and reduced a bit. The policy research, I would think, is probably going to be 40%. That is something that if we're really assessing our programs and being able to bring rigorous and robust thinking to you, that orange slice would really increase to include all those types of work to evaluate data, to do the research and bring draft legislation to you. And I think the compliance advice will always be there as a steady part. That might drop down to, say, 15%. Again, these are just relative numberings, but I think that slice might drop a bit more as any issues that come to the policy team, we sort of develop a record and a pattern of having provided that advice. It may not be that intensive work. So I think the policy research pie will expand and some of those other two will decrease a bit.
Thank you. Commissioner Rennie?
Director Pelham, just a question on this attachment that you have. There's a column called impact, a number then, and a column called urgency, timeliness, and there's a number on that. What do those numbers represent, and what does one mean it's the most urgent and most impact, or what?
Yeah, actually, it's quite the opposite. The higher the number, the greater the impact as we see it, and the greater the urgency as we see it. So, for example, public financing is a core program. It's a really important program to, obviously, during election time, but to the city's fundamental framework of how we engage people on campaigns and how we engage voters in democracy. It's a program that needs to be assessed periodically to make sure it's working as well as it can.
The problem I have with the way you're numbering it is that normally the top priority is 1, and 9 is on a scale of 10. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Or is 10? Then why isn't it 10 instead of 9?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I think this is it's our initial law, but trying to get some priority order to this. But I certainly appreciate your comment that one would think this would be number 1. And again, we can retool this as we go forward if this framework is to make it most useful for you and the public.
I do think for the public, it probably would be more understandable using what you normally think of a number 1 being most important and number 10 being least important. But
I think that's a fair point.
Okay.
Commissioner Cobb?
I am. I want to reassure myself I understand the theory and that it's logical to me. You've told us at the beginning of your presentation that about 50% of staff time and attention is devoted to public financing. Is that accurate?
No.
It's not?
No. If you look at the first slide, there was a reference to 25% of the staff's time approximately was spent on supporting the public financing program.
Right.
And that's the 25% that the policy team roughly engaged in supporting that program during the election.
I understood that it also included the compliance advice.
That's a broader range of issues assumed within compliance
That's
advice.
more than public financing.
That's correct.
But public financing was included in that.
Yes, yeah, I think that
All right, so what do you think of the approximate amount of total time and attention on a scale of 100% with at least 25% clear? 30%, 35%?
Other than public financing, when you were looking at this? If you could just give me a moment.
Commissioner Cobb, I'm sorry for my benefit. Can you specify, like, what
I
exactly
want
are
to
you
know
asking?
where this urgency, timeliness, and the impact.
Yes, I just,
9 and 8, I had thought that about 50% of time and attention was devoted to public financing, which would make it logical that it would be the number one priority.
I think there are two different things. First, if I can correct, I was just consulting with Pat Ford.
Yeah.
The 25% of time that the pie chart estimates as having been spent on public financing includes all the advice on public financing as well. So anything related to public financing, the team reflected in this pie chart noted as 25% on public financing. This depiction of a
Sorry. I apologize to everybody. Okay. Yeah.
the estimation in the pie chart of what has happened is a bit unrelated to the prioritization that we've identified on the attachment in Agenda Memo 6. This is what we believe to be of significant impact going forward to to the Commission's policy agenda. It doesn't necessarily, the 9 or the 8 doesn't necessarily reflect time that we've spent on it. It's time that we believe it's an indication of a program we believe is worthwhile to spend time doing policy research, legislative development, data analysis to see if the program is working as strongly as it can or if there are ways to improve it.
It is still the most highly rated under impact and urgency of all the other policy.
Yes, that's in our estimation. We believe it's worth that level of attention.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Public comment?
Thank you. I'm Larry Bush, speaking for myself. I find that this outline doesn't have the benefit of public comment, other than me standing here now. But there was no review that said from the public what we thought was important and why the priority should be the way it is. So, for example, one of the issues is slate mailers, which is down here as a priority 1. That's after the Ethics Commission itself voted to have slate mailers transferred to the Ethics Commission in April of 2015. So it's already been 3 years, and now it's priority 1. I'm not sure exactly how that comes to be such a low priority, but it's pretty low. And if you're going to talk about public financing, how can you talk about public financing without knowing what the universe is of spending that's going on in campaigns? One of which is, of course, slate mailers. Slate mailers are often for-profit entities that are a business for someone. So I suggest that you put out this list and have an IP meeting and invite people who actually have experience in campaigns to give their views on what should be given priorities. Part of the issues is also on the Sunshine Task Force. I wrote an email that went to most members of the commission, though I didn't have Commissioner Ambrose's email address, so I didn't get a copy, but I'd like to make sure that, well, there. And I strongly suggest that you take a look at a deeper cut of what the issues are that are involved with transparency and accountability, which is the whole point of the Sunshine Task Force. I also had sent out an email that dealt with a series of issues that are included in this, and I want to make sure that you have that brought to your attention, and there's more copies of that for you.
I see that.
It includes issues about public financing. It includes some of the issues that were taken up but dropped in the Prop J reform that you all looked at earlier this year. And it also looks at some of the things that have not been addressed. I think that overall, this is a document, as presented to you, that reflects the best thinking of people inside the building, but it does not represent what I expect to hear from people who are outside the building. Just on one simple example of public financing, where you have to verify the signatures of people who have signed on that they've given you $100. The issue came up earlier this year that there was not leeway for people who are victims of domestic violence and don't want to put out their address. Those kinds of things really need to be addressed very specifically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, for the record, I'm Charlie Marsteller again. I wanted to state that a number of staff people are expert in certain policy areas. So now that we're losing Kyle, for instance, I don't know what expertise he may have had in addition to what it was he worked on. But one of the assessment points might be the availability of the technical aspects of the staff's competence. And I would also draw your attention to the public's competence in certain policy areas. For instance, Mr. Bush is a well-known expert in slate mailers. And while he's with us today, he did mention how important it was to discuss slate mailers, and I think it's important for you to take into perspective the technical expertise of the public, because, you know, as he said 3 years ago, this was first discussed, and maybe 3 years from now, that expertise may not be available to you. And it might be very useful for you to prioritize in part on the basis of what technical expertise might be available at a given point in time. I think that's a practical aspect to the question of programming priorities. I would also say in the last campaign, I did get into 2 areas on public financing. One was obviously regarding the Alioto issue, and it raised the question as to whether or not we should be looking at the Seattle voucher system, because that would simplify the qualification process possibly immeasurably. And so I think that the director is correct in prioritizing that as an area that we want to address now, and holding a conference to discuss this issue and invite the Alioto folks back to the room and other interested parties. I know Mr. Gollinger had interesting questions. Those things could all be brought into the process during the course of the election and the next few months, and it could well be that we could glean better things from doing it concurrent with the election than a year from now. So those were thoughts that I had because I know you're trying to get to the heart of PF. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Director Pelham, what would be most useful for you and staff with regard to direction on these policy matters?
I think as the motion as you had framed it earlier, it would be useful to us. It would be, if you're confirming that the Commission's top 2 or 3 priorities are as shown, and if the Commission is comfortable with the approach of bringing back every quarter a a look at this policy framework. We will then proceed, if that's the commission's the vote, but we will proceed along those lines to continue the work in the public financing area, and as bandwidth and resources permit, would be focused on those secondary priorities.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, Commissioner Copp?
Yeah. Are you representing to the commission that by June 30, 2019, all of these will have been accomplished?
By all these, do you mean?
All 16 of them?
No, I'm not representing that.
All right. Number 2, slate mailers. What is the reason, in light of the comment that they should more appropriately be handled by the Ethics Commission, that its urgency is ranked at the lowest level?
I think this reflects the focus that, as identified in the prior 3 or 4 pages, there are a number of issues that require focus by the Ethics Commission on things that are not yet disclosed, on laws that do not yet fully achieve their goals, and that need to be fixed in order to have the voters' expectations fulfilled, that the laws are strong and workable and enforceable. In my own view, the slate mailer issue is one that, on balance, all things being equal, there is disclosure that does happen now. It may not be in the ideal location, but I think there are, on balance, a number of larger, more compelling issues that, with our limited bandwidth, we believe are important to tackle sooner rather than later. I think, if perhaps to Chair Chu's question, as we go forward, are there more resources that the Commission could use to make sure that we can get through all of these kinds of issues more quickly? I would love to see that. We're not there yet, but so we have to make hard choices about what we can do with the resources that we have, and inevitably some will come out higher than others for us.
And given realistically, right now, we have a staff of 1 for the next few months until we can backfill the open policy position.
I have a similar question with respect to the whistleblower program. That's ranked at the lowest also. And I'd appreciate your views on the reason it's ranked at the lowest. In urgency.
This is moving it. Not the order. Right. Yeah, so this, for clarify for the public who may not be looking at the same document, this is the proposal that Judge Kopp, that you made to, you had expressed an interest in repealing the whistleblower ordinance as to its being housed in the Controller's office and moving that to the Ethics Commission. Again, when we think about, do we have information that suggests there is a need for that, I think that's an unknown. Do we have more pressing projects that the Commission can and should weigh in at this time that have known issues? Yes. So this is why, on balance, there are other issues that on this list take higher priority in our minds as a staff than having that at the top of the list or near the top of the list.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So my motion was to adopt the approach outlined by Director Pelham and to confirm the top 3 policy project rankings in attachment 1 to agenda item 6. Ask if there's a second.
I'll second it.
Second.
I have a comment. I have to rely upon the executive director and others on the staff in terms of day-to-day work. But I do not agree with the priorities, except for a couple of them, as indicated by my previous question. And on priority one, call it that, public financing, I expect that this Seattle system will be investigated and will be a part of the eventual transmission or report to the commission. I've forgotten, Mr. Shen, what's the current charter rule on abstaining? Are there abstentions permitted by law or not?
Generally, abstentions are not allowed. If you want, you can ask your fellow commissioners for a motion to recuse yourself from the
Well,
particular
that's
item.
in terms of recusing yourself. All right, I will vote.
And I just wanted to comment to make sure that I'm clear. What we're doing here is agreeing with the executive director that for the next 3 months, given the availability of staff, that in all likelihood, the first 3 items that are listed here, public financing, the CFRO, I assume particularly focusing on the recent legislation adopting regs to reflect the anti-corruption ordinance amendment, which is imperative before December, and then the additional, what I would call probably a less time-consuming project, but doing research about online political communications and trying to figure out, you know, where is the leading edge on getting our arms around that new mechanism, with the assumption that that you will also continue to do the other things that are on your wheel, which is be responsive to legislative demands as they arise, or an appeal from somebody who apparently has an issue about public finance. You know, that is also going to consume some of your time, and that we will be back here in the fall after this work is done. Hopefully, you will have someone in hand. And be able to, I think also too, maybe digest a little bit more your columns and balancing. We're not in voting for this. This is not a set in stone. This is a tool that kind of allows us to focus on what is on any given day. Choosing between one and the other, you have to get something out on public financing in the next 3 months so that we can, okay. So anyway, I will support your motion on that, with that understanding.
So vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
The motion passes 3 votes with Commissioner Kopp in opposition. Agenda item number 7, discussion of monthly staff policy report.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Pat Ford, Policy Analyst. As Director Pelham has already mentioned, Kyle Kundert will be unfortunately leaving our staff. Today is his last day, and he's unable to be here, so I will be presenting the memo that he wrote for this month's policy report. I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have. I'll briefly just recap a few of the major items here. Starting section 1 on page 2. Since your last meeting, there have been further developments regarding the anti-corruption and accountability ordinance that you approved at the April 18th meeting. Subsequently, that went back to the Board of Supervisors. It was approved after 2 readings. It was signed by the mayor on May 30th. So that means that towards the end of this month, certain provisions will become operative. As you recall, there was a section added to the ordinance to make certain provisions operative 30 days after the ordinance became effective, and the remainder to become effective on January 1st, 2019. So on June 29th, the first set of provisions will become operative. So we're working with engagement and compliance and our IT teams to operationalize those provisions. So that's the update on the ACAO. The whistleblower ordinance, which the commission approved, I believe, in 2016, concluded the meet and confer process some months ago. It's now working its way through the board. The latest development there is that it is supposed to be considered by the Rules Committee on June 27th. So I will be in attendance at that meeting should there be any questions about the provisions that have bearing on what our department does. Because as you know, we have responsibility over whistleblower retaliation claims, but this ordinance has a lot of other pieces too. So I'll be there in case anything comes up regarding the ethics pieces. Next, the review of the public financing system. This is a direct tie-in to the last agenda item. This is something that the policy division has already been working towards. As you know, there's been an appeal. There seems to be another appeal forthcoming about determinations that have been made by staff in the administration of public financing. So we're already working towards looking at possible reforms to the system to make sure that it's achieving its intended purposes. So we have been engaged in that, and now that on the last agenda item you've affirmed that this is to be the #1 policy priority, this will continue to be something that I'm focused on. Advice regulations. The charter provides for 2 ways for individuals to ask for advice. They can ask for formal written opinions that will be brought to the commission, and there's a process for you to review and affirm those. There's also informal advice that's provided at the staff level. However, there's no official guidelines that actually inform the public or the staff about how you go about seeking this advice. So this is something that has been developed in sort of an ad hoc manner, but we're committing those to regulations. We have drafts of the regulations, and at this point, we plan to bring that forward to you at the July meeting as an introduction and possible action, but at the very least, just to introduce them and perhaps have you take action on them as you see fit, July or August. But these would be to just basically tell people, what do I have to do in order to ask for informal advice? What do I have to do to get a formal written opinion from the commission? This will help to give people an idea of what the process is like. The next item, Policy Prioritization Plan. Again, that was the last agenda item, so I won't rehash it. This is something that we've been heavily engaged on developing. The next item, online paid political communications, is one of the priorities that was identified on that prioritization plan, so I won't speak to that. So the next section talks about a couple of other pieces of legislation that we've been following. One is the ordinance put forward by Supervisor Kim. The commission unanimously approved this ordinance. The only news on that is that it was before the Rules Committee on Wednesday of this week. It was not approved. I want to call out a mistake in the memo here that says that it was approved. It actually was continued to the call of the chair. So this is still before the Rules Committee, not the full board. Is something that I'll be tracking, and I'll be available to answer any questions that the members of the Rules Committee may have. Secondly, the legislation put forward by Supervisor Cohen. This is to require financial reporting by candidates and committees making expenditures in certain trustee elections. The 3 bodies are listed here. At this point, the status is the same for the trustee election ordinance. This has been continued to the call of the chair of the Rules Committee. So likewise, we'll be tracking this. I think there is a tentative date for that to come up, but it's not set for sure yet. And then the next page, frankly, this memo was written before you were able to take action on the policy prioritization plan, so that determination will take precedence over what's listed here. This basically just explains the projects that we kind of had on our radar, but the 3 priorities that were identified on the plan and that you affirmed, those will be guiding how we, or I, allocate my time over the coming quarter, so and between now and September. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions you may have, but I think that encapsulates what we've been doing on the policy front.
One question. It's not within your ambit probably to answer, but I am curious as to why it's taken almost 3 months for the FPP to issue an opinion on whether a county political committee is subject to our jurisdiction. Or
Yeah, I'm not sure, Commissioner. I did get a phone call from an attorney at the FPPC. He shared his preliminary conclusion with me, but for some reason he has not committed that to writing. So I will follow up with him and see why we haven't been able to get that in writing as of yet.
I'm interested. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? No?
Commissioner, if I may just add one note to the July agenda, in terms of the public financing discussion you mentioned this month, and I think one of the, Charlie Marsteller might have mentioned, we do have planned for next month's meeting a sort of an overview of the public financing process. We thought that would be a good time to bring that forward so that it enables discussion and feedback, issue spotting by both the public and members of the commission at that time.
Thank you. Okay, public comment?
Commissioners, Larry Bush, just a few points. Again, I want to say that your calendar and list of items really needs to go to a public hearing, because this is not something that can be decided just from the voices inside City Hall. I'm sorry that you decided not to go that way. I hope that you'll reconsider it. In this list on item 7, regulating PAC activity, was a request that was made by Commissioner Rennie. It's on the last page of the, where a recommendation is none at this time. In discussing that issue with legal experts, it would appear that we might be able to regulate some PAC activity in terms of donors to PACs. If the donors have city interest and the PAC is earmarked to elect a city official, which would, of course, have been the case in this past election. For example, the firefighters' Local 798 PAC that was devoted to electing London Breed, and which was funded heavily by people who had decisions pending at City Hall that would be made by the next mayor. It would be possible, it appears, according to the attorneys that we have been conferring with, who are election experts, to draw something narrowly enough that it would apply to those kinds of contributions. So I urge that to be taken off of the none at this time recommendation and moved up to be part of the public financing issue. It affects the whole issue of public financing. One other point of clarification, the commission was just informed that there are disclosures of slate mailers, and so they exist. There are no such disclosures of slate mailers. I'm sorry to inform you that you have been misinformed. All slate mailers are simply thrown into a file drawer in the basement of City Hall. There's not a master list. There's nothing electronic. There is nothing at all. You have no idea how much money is going into slate mailers, who's paying for it, what it's paying for, or anything else. So, and I think you need to correct the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, Charlie Marsteller for the record. I do want to emphasize that the slate mailer issue, the slate mailers themselves by state law are stored at the local elections office in a file. And they put them in the file so that anybody who has an issue or a governmental agent needing to audit can come to that location and look at those slate mailers because those samples are available. I personally bring in my own receiving or inbound mail, which will include slate mailers, for instance, the one that was done by the firefighters locally, and this last mayoral election. And Mr. Bush, when he talks about slate mailers, he's talking about the mechanism of taking a scrub and basically auditing the dynamics of how a slate mailer operation works in San Francisco, because as you know, there's a lot of money, as been specified in the memo from Mr. Bush, in this last election cycle from a small number of individuals, something like $10 million by 33 people, that really added up. And a lot of that money was channeled through slate mailers. And it was surprising to get something from the firefighters that bore the picture of a mayoral candidate. It looked like a mailer from that particular candidate and not a slate mailer from a organization that's trying to instill their PAC recommendations or whatever to the public generally. So I am very pleased to, basically, though, we do have a structure. This is a major improvement over the past, and I do think that next month when we hold our workshop on public financing, we should do an aggressive outreach. For instance, we should notify the Alioto, Mrs. Alioto, I guess, directly to ask or notify her email list that we're holding a workshop which will explain the public financing process in detail, and that will allow for the public to make comment on recommendations for improvements, or just basically to be present when we discuss what those improvements are. But an aggressive outreach on the PF program, I think, will be welcomed by the public, and I think you'll have a good attendance, so I would definitely get a big room.
Thank you. Agenda item number 8, discussion of monthly staff enforcement report, including an update on various programmatic and operational highlights of the enforcement program's activities since the last monthly meeting.
Thank you, Chair Chu. I'm going to keep my remarks brief at this time. I'll observe that investigators have, as always, been working very diligently to bring down the body of complaints that we have received. You'll notice that the average age of preliminary review, which is the triage that we perform on complaints that we've received, has been reduced again. I believe last month it was at 2.7 months an average age, and it's now at 2. Unfortunately, the flip side of that is that the average age of investigations has inched up a little bit from, I can't recall, 10 point something to about 11 and a half months now. That's the average age. Investigators and I have every optimism that over the course of the next 6 or 8 weeks, we're actually going to clear out a number of the older investigations, a number of the older complaints that are in open investigation. And so I hope that we will see together the average age of investigations actually come down substantially when we succeed in finalizing the oldest cases, which I have suggested before we refer to as legacy complaints. Operationally, you'll see in the report that the Controller's Office Whistleblower Program invited the Ethics Commission to make a presentation yesterday at what they call their...
Could you speak into the microphone a little bit more?
Sure,
I have a hard time hearing.
Is it? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Sorry
much
about
better.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the Controller's Office Whistleblower Program invited Ethics Commission staff to speak yesterday at what they call their departmental liaison training. The first of these took place in November of 2017. This was the second. I think they plan to host these maybe semi-annually. The reason for the invitation was that a number of questions arose at the last training with respect to whistleblower retaliation. Former Deputy Director and Director of Enforcement Jessica Bloom had attended that meeting and fielded sort of ad hoc those questions as they arose. This time staff made a presentation. Really the presentation was about the mechanics of whistleblower retaliation, so we walked participants through the ordinance describing the legal elements
of retaliation, the burden of proof, the standard of proof. We described briefly how staff might go about investigating a claim of retaliation. And this time, I can't say whether it's because staff described the process so clearly or because staff bored the participants to tears, but there were really no questions apart from whether someone who faces personal liability for retaliation would at least have the benefit of an insurance payout.
You'll see remarks about the number and kinds of complaints that we've received and the number and kinds of investigations that remain open. I would direct you to Table 3 with respect to penalty installment plans. That table is blank. That table is blank because there are no more outstanding penalty payments that we are waiting for. And if I recall correctly, we will no longer accept penalty installment plans. And so likely going forward, we'll remove that table. I will also say that at our last meeting, some questions arose about the process that the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue pursues when they are trying to collect outstanding penalties. And regrettably, I've been playing phone tag with staff at the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue. I have conducted some research into that process, but I think it would benefit commissioners most if I had the clearest answers provided by BDR staff themselves. And if commissioners might request that a staff member from BDR come and make a presentation to the commission, I can arrange that, although I think in recent memory that may have happened. But I can double check, and I'm happy for input from you all.
Yes, I think that, for me, that would be very helpful if BDR would come and give us an update on these pending matters, because they have been, with Chris Jackson, there's 2 matters, and the committee to elect Norman for supervisor. I mean, some of these date back 3-5 years. So I'd like to better understand what BDR is doing and when we can expect resolution on these long pending matters.
Mm-hmm.
But kudos to the team for bringing down the average age of preliminary review. That was a huge backlog that you guys have gotten through, and keep up the great work. Any other
Questions?
Commissioner Kopp.
Let me start on page 1. You have an opinion as to the reason or reasons for the preliminary review time being reduced to about 2 months?
The reason that the amount of time has been
what caused the reduction?
the diligence of the investigators.
Okay.
Also having staff now.
Yes, the diligence of the investigators that we have, which is nearly a full panoply.
Okay.
We'd like to bring it down even farther. We hope to in the future.
Then on these uncollected penalties on Norman for supervisor, what happens now? In other words, all I see is a return to sender notation. It would be helpful if that column also included the next planned step or steps. What is the next planned action on that?
Certainly, Commissioner Kopp, I think if we succeed in bringing a member of the Bureau's staff to address the commission, we can get clarity on that question.
So you get the information from the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue in that column.
That's correct.
Right?
Correct.
I think, Madam Chairwoman, that should be done. Because the notation on the next one, Urbano, is working with legal services for proof of service. Who's legal services?
I don't actually know. My guess would be that they are a service agency.
I don't know either. I'd like to know.
Sure.
They can explain it in writing as far as I'm concerned. They don't have to take time to be here, but it's unanswered. Same thing on Chris Jackson. No statement of what happens next. And then on Lynette Sweet, do you know if a bankruptcy claim was filed?
When it was
on behalf
filed?
of the city and county?
Sorry, ask again.
Lynette Sweet filed for bankruptcy several months ago. Do you know if a claim in the bankruptcy court, the proceeding, was filed by the city and county?
I believe so. Deputy Director Bloom was heavily involved in that process, but I don't have an accurate answer to that question, so I will find out and provide it to you.
Can you provide that?
Yes.
And there was, I guess that, that completes my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions? Public comment?
Larry Bush, I'd like to note for the record that a number of campaign complaints were filed in the last 6 months with the Ethics Commission and other bodies. None of them have been acted on, so there was no action on any of the complaints prior to the election. That's too bad, because some of these complaints clearly had merit. Also, we've had no action on the complaint that Christine Johnson did not file her Form 700 when it was due on April 1st. This is now June, and that complaint has not been acted on. We again believe that the city would be well served if you adopted the same policy as exists in Los Angeles and Sacramento that allows citizens to initiate and recover some part of any penalties. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 9, discussion of Executive Director's report. An update of various programmatic and operational highlights of Ethics Commission staff activities since the Commission's last monthly meeting.
Thank you, Chair Chu. Agenda item 9 has a brief report from me highlighting activities and issues from around the office over the last month. I just want to briefly point out, in terms of the budget update, the requests that we had presented to the mayor's office in February to enable us to sustain the progress we've started over the last couple of years was incorporated and addressed fully in the mayor's budget proposal. It is a modest year for us, but we know that a budget request in those terms, but we know that it is important that we were not cut, that we were provided with additional resources to expand the tools that the enforcement staff can use at its disposal to get through cases more effectively, to ensure that we're providing a heightened level of training and staff development so that we can retain the great staff that we have, and also to ensure that we have further resources than we have had in the past to use for translation services. We know we have a lot of outreach to do in the communities that we've not been able to do yet, so we're hoping to see that ramped up in the coming year. We also have been in conversation to make sure that we have the funding to focus on the ACIO implementation, so I think we will have good news on that front shortly. For the June election, we had a number of activities that were going on. I just highlighted some of them here. There was a lot of work regarding the public financing program, lifting of individual expenditure ceilings. We already, however, are turning to November, as you know, that with a deadline this week for the Board of Supervisors to file their nominating petitions with the Department of Elections. There will be additional deadlines for other candidates on the November ballot in, I believe, early August. We are gearing up. We had our first candidate information session on Tuesday for candidates and their treasurers. We will be producing that online, so those who couldn't be at that first live session will have have access to it. And we look forward to establishing a series of other sessions for candidates to come to and ask their questions. They've generally been well received, and we've been able to ask questions live about the campaign and the rules of the road. And we also are continuing to update our dashboards so that that information is accessible to the public as the filings come in. I would, as I mentioned earlier, in one of our other items, and Kyle Kundert, our senior policy analyst, has decided to leave the commission. His last day was today. He regrets that he is not here, but he also very much wanted to appreciate the support and work and rigor that this commission has put him through over the last year. I think he's looking forward to a bit of time off that was well earned, but we will miss him, and we were very thankful for the work he did to help set up the policy shop over a very busy year, but also a really exciting one for us. In that vein, however, I did want to announce that Pat Ford will be replacing Kyle as senior policy analyst. Pat has been with the commission over the past year. He's been working closely with Kyle and others on policy issues, and so we will have, I'm hoping, a very seamless transition to support these very pressing policy needs, and just delighted to report that, that Pat will be continuing on in that role. The positions that policy analyst position that then will be vacated. We will begin the process soon to post that position. As Table 1 shows, there are a number of positions actively in recruitment right now. There is a senior IS business analyst that we are reviewing applications for next week. So we'll have more information at the July meeting. That will round out Stephen Massey's team of 4 IT people in our office, which is just critical to all our operational needs as well as our programmatic needs to provide effective public disclosure. We know we have a lot of work to continue to do in that area. And also we have the 2 positions that have been pending because of other competing priorities that have required my attention. I am going to be working closely with our personnel consultant at Human Resources to make every effort to have those positions also posted to expand our engagement and compliance resources. We desperately need them. So I need to make that a major priority over the next week or 2. And then lastly, I did also want to announce that we have the position of our Director of Enforcement and Legal Affairs will be posted on Monday. Like other positions, it will be a 3-week, roughly, time frame for submitting applications, and so we will also make sure that information is out and available for those who might be interested in that. So there will continue to be a number of efforts underway on our hiring front. Lastly, but not least, something else that has been consuming our focus that we will also talk and provide more information publicly about next week. As you know, for some time, the commission staff has been preparing for an update of our office space to make sure that we are able to accommodate the 24 FTEs or full-time authorities, individual human beings that we will be accommodating in our staff in the next few months. And so we were notified just several weeks ago that the Department of Public Works, who can do the construction, has a window, and that construction will be starting next week. So we have been working closely with the offices of the Department of Real Estate and the city, the Controller's office. We will have our staff housed in some of those locations. More information will be on our website probably on Monday, and we'll also make sure that is pushed out to our interested persons lists and others so that people know they can still access our services regularly and hopefully very uninterruptedly with our front office staff relocating temporarily to the office of the Controller in room 316 at City Hall. We'll have some additional staff locations down the hall in an annex, and some staff will also rotate in with doing some telework. We will also be located on the 4th floor of Van Ness, where we currently are, in a location that the Department of Real Estate is providing. That'll provide regular room for staff meetings, others of us to be there close to the construction to answer any questions that might come up. We do know that this will, of course, as any relocation or construction project, can have bumps, but we have been planning and working closely with departments to try and keep those to a minimum. We do expect that the transition will be seamless, that the public will still be able to access us, our data, our resources, and our assistance as needed over the coming several several weeks as this construction plays out. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I would note actually that we will expect to be in sort of steady state in a week's time with this renovation and the move. We will be out of our offices by close of business on June 21st, so we will be officially housed in our various locations on Friday the 22nd. We've confirmed that. This will not interrupt the Commission's July meeting, which is scheduled for July 20th. We'll be in steady state and be able to deliver on that. Because of the expected time frame, however, for a move back into our office space in early August, we have asked and are recommending that the Commission meeting for August be canceled. That's on the 17th, because that is likely the time that we will be back in, moving into the offices. And we also understand that Commissioner Lee had a conflict with that meeting. So that's one of the items that I also wanted to highlight for your attention in consultation with the chair. The August meeting may be something that is affected by this. But I'm happy to answer any questions. It's been a very busy time, but no time like the present to make some of these changes happen.
Thank you, Director Pelham. First, I just wanted to say, and it's unfortunate that Kyle can't be here, but I wanted to extend, my own thanks on behalf of myself personally as a commission member for his policy expertise, his legal acumen, his incredible work ethic, his grace under pressure, and his many contributions over his short yet long tenure here at the Commission. I wish him the very best in his next chapter back in Wisconsin. I'm very sad that he's leaving, but happy for him personally, and would ask that you just convey those sentiments to him, and also want to take the opportunity to congratulate Pat on his elevation to the role. I think that you'll be we have the benefit of having a seamless transition with your experience and expertise and long history, and being side by side with working shoulder to shoulder with Kyle. And I hope and I trust that you'll be able to find a terrific replacement for yourself going forward sooner rather than later, I hope. Yes, Commissioner Rennie.
I would join in those comments, both as to Mr. Kyle.
And then I just wanted to note, Director Pelham, on page 3 of your table 2, that the statement of economic interest filings late fees, that we had a budgeted amount of $125 and a little bit more than 10%. I attribute that to our new requirement that all commissioners and appointees have to file their Form 700s and complete their trainings in order to participate in meetings, and that would account for the drop-off in the fees. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a part of it. I think next month I will look to bring back more detail on that for you. I suspect there's a part of it that may also be the juggling of our folks with election-related mandates that we may be taking longer to get this number accurate, but I'm updated. But I'm happy to confirm that one way or the other so that you have information about that in both regards, since there is a new law that took effect that affects this issue.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the Executive Director's report? Public comment?
I skipped a beat on the moving. You're relocating to where?
Our front office staff, our reception, will be just in the City Controller's office at 316 City Hall.
Okay. And when you are moving the office, I'm confused. You're relocating the entire staff?
Just to be clear, thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
There is front office staff that will be located in the reception area of City Hall in the Controller's office. He has graciously provided us for spaces for staff to be there. So in terms of the front-facing staff, the access point will be room 316 City Hall. There are other staff that will temporarily be located in another part of City Hall on the third floor, as well. There will be other staff located on the 4th floor of Van Ness, and there will be other staff that telework during this time, and we sort of rotate into staff meetings and other communications. So we will be in several locations, but our experience through a recent telework pilot, and I think our ongoing practice is we know that we need to be in very, very close communication with each other during this time so that we don't miss a beat
Right.
in being able to respond to the public's needs.
Yeah, during an election cycle.
Right,
Yeah, is critical.
right.
And where will you ultimately form as a group?
We will ultimately be back where we are now, which is
Okay.
25 Van Ness, Suite 220. We're having those spaces updated so that we can accommodate the number of staff that we now have.
Great. And so,
Temporary relocation only.
so for instance, the file room may be reconfigured in such a way you'll have more space, that
Yes.
type of thing. And you're not taking out your kitchen, I hope.
No comment on the kitchen.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Agenda item number 10, discussion and possible action regarding status of complaints received or initiated by the Ethics Commission.
I request, Madam Chairwoman, a closed session on this matter.
We'll take public comment before we go into closed session. None? We'll head
You
into,
need a second on it.
oh,
Second. Commissioner Cops.
okay. So we have a second to go into closed session, and there's no public comment, so Pat, can you put us into closed session? Are we back? All right, we're back in open session. Commissioner Rennie?
Yes, I would move that we not close anything that was discussed in closed session.
Second that motion?
The second, so there's a motion to not disclose what was discussed in closed session with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Agenda item number 11, discussion and possible action on items for future meetings.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman.
It's Commissioner Kopp.
I introduce for action as soon as possible by the commission a proposed ordinance to amend the Campaign and Government Conduct Code to change certain eligibility requirements for candidates to receive public financing. The most notable would be adding a section, and I've got copies, thanks to Mr. Chen, of all of these for other members of the commission and staff, that provides that if a candidate's received public financing in a previous campaign, and there's been an audit finding that the candidate's prior publicly financed campaign failed to maintain complete campaign records for expenditures totaling $10,000 or more, then that person is no longer eligible for public financing in any future campaign. And there's a lesser provision that any outstanding forms that must be filed with the city and county by a candidate or the candidate's previous campaign committees required under the Political Reform Act of the state of California, which haven't been filed within 2 years of the required date, that the Ethics Commission had previously notified the candidate of such outstanding forms shall not be eligible as well. And I would ask that this be set on our calendar for action at our next meeting.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So this is an ordinance to amend the public financing regime, as you just noted. So okay. So you are suggesting, you would like to place this on the agenda for action, for discussion and possible action at the next month, in advance and before staff has done the policy review for
I would
the
expect
overall public finance code.
I would expect staff to report for possible action at the July meeting. Isn't that the custom and practice?
If I might respond to that, I think it is the custom and practice of the staff to respond to policy that the commission as a body would like us to prioritize. My question and concern is how we prioritize the analysis of one piece of work ahead of the body of other public financing analysis we also need to do. I think my recommendation would be to fold this proposal into this larger discussion of public financing and enable us to bring it back so that we can help the commission see and the public see how the moving parts of the public financing fit together. I would caution the commission against bringing one piece of a large system and doing that ahead of a basic understanding of how all those parts fit together. I think that the staff's perspective would be to request that we be able to fold that into the organic look at the campaign finances system as a whole, rather than make it a priority of all the public financing provisions we need to bring back and look at starting next month.
Okay.
I also think that given that we are conducting in July a briefing, if you will, of the public finance system for the benefit of the commission and the public, that we would be well served to have that before we undertake discussion of any changes to the public finance provisions, and that I would agree with the executive director's recommendation that we look at public financing in its entirety as opposed to piecemeal. If my fellow commissioners have any additional thoughts or perspectives on this issue.
The only thing I'm sorry.
That concept, but there's no reason why in that presentation in July, if they're talking about public finance, we can't address the subject of Commissioner Kopp's proposed amendment.
And that was going to be my comment as well. I mean, if the Commissioner Kopp is going to propose this legislation and we're going to do outreach and bring everybody to talk about public financing, you could certainly share this with people and put it on for discussion. I would also agree with the director. It might be best to take whatever action we're going to take, if there are amendments to the public financing law and some comprehensive piece of legislation, and at least give people who are going to show up in July the opportunity to feel that we hadn't already decided that this was all we were going to do about public financing.
We can certainly, I appreciate those suggestions. We can certainly make this part of a discussion highlighting these issues in the briefing that talks about how the current system works and what potential issues might have arisen around those current provisions.
Okay, thank you. Any other agenda items that the commissioners like to put forward? Public comment? Agenda item 12, additional opportunity for public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda pursuant to Ethics Commission Bylaws, Article 7, Section 2. No public comment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All right, we're adjourned.